Hello and welcome to Built on Air, a podcast and video series about all things Airtable. I'm your host, Zoe Vanderplu, and I'd like to thank our sponsor, OpenSide. OpenSide's newest product, Onto Air Forms, is the Airtable Forms solution that you've been looking for. Visit openside.com to see how it can take your Airtable workflow to the next level. For a limited time, get Onto Air Forms free when you purchase the Onto Air Actions Zapier connector. This week on the show, we meet Remy Margerum from Santa Barbara, California. Remy is CFO of Nomad Goods, who describe themselves, appropriately, as the Patagonia of iPhone accessories. Nomad sells their sleek cases, cables, and other gear on their own e-commerce website as well as via wholesale channels. So their product and order management system needs to be able to handle inputs and calculations for a myriad of scenarios. Although Remy's official title deals with finances, his systems and data science background allows him to lend a lot to the evolution of Nomad's internal operations. To no one's surprise, since this is an Airtable podcast after all, Remy has created an astounding base in Airtable that functions as an enterprise resource planning solution for Nomad. In this episode, Remy leads us through a thorough deep dive into the Nomad Goods Backend Airtable base. He walks us through the general structure of adding products and placing a wholesale order. We take a look at some of the advanced functions that he's built into the base and how they use Page Designer to generate shipping documents. Remy also discusses their approach to keeping their data secure in Airtable while allowing their team the flexibility to use data however they need. Visit BuiltOnAir.com to sign up for the Built on Air mailing list, where you can get weekly updates on new podcast episodes and other fun Airtable things.
Perfect. All right, so just kind of high level, like I talked about, orders, line items, shipments. And for those of you that do object-based coding, this is kind of how I think of it, is these are the order objects, line item objects, shipment objects, directory objects. Then we have these kind of tabs, and I like to think of these as dictionaries, kind of like in a Python-esque definition. And so these are just definitions, and it's basically divided up. I like to divide it up this way. We could have all of these just be in this one thing, product data, but different teams do different things on our like operations and product design side. So it's divided up basically so that each team can have their own kind of aspect. And then we have all these other tabs. This parse tab is just due to just an anomaly in Airtable search. We have to have it. I'll explain that later. This is more mapping, and then these are all just mapping basically. And then once we get out of those areas, so everything that's numbered is kind of like I like to say it's like an off limits area where no one is supposed to edit there. I mean, they can edit the records. Like if you want to make a new record, yeah, you make a new record. But really, you shouldn't be editing columns or changing names or adding new columns. Mm-hmm. Everything to the right of that, this is kind of just free for all. Anyone can just add their own tab, and people add their own tabs all the time. And they vary however much someone wants, whatever they want to have, because they have access to all the information that's stored there. So you can just do a quick lookup and get whatever you need.
So how big is the team that's sort of working in this Airtable every day?
Yeah, so we're a 25-person team.
Oh, wow. And then does everyone have edit access, or is it like some people can read only, or how do you kind of control that?
Everyone has edit access, which I think is for a lot of companies would be really scary. But we try and operate very transparently so that everyone can see everything that's going on. And we have had problems in the past where someone didn't really know what they were doing and edited something by accident. But it's easy to fix normally because you can roll back and it's not too big of a deal. Mm-hmm. And kind of the way we have it where you're not supposed to edit these areas, it just kind of works pretty easily.
Right. You guys kind of have like an honor system going on, I guess.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then obviously, right, of course, if people kind of have the know-how and comfort to create their own tables for things that they might need, do you guys do sort of any, training with people on Airtable or your, Nomad ERP or?
Yeah, for sure. So whenever someone wants to add something like that, I first ask them to ask me or Reese's other person who works on Airtable as kind of the development side. And then we basically determine if it makes sense to be added as a field within our kind of operating Airtable, or if it should just be built out however they want. So sometimes what I'll say is just build out whatever you want in here. Like, for example, here's this MSRP checker, which just basically checks if our pricing is set in a way that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And that's like a pretty specific use case, but this could definitely be like built into product data, for example, and then live right there. And it could be basically just one column, but someone built this out. And then essentially what we'll do is we'll move this into, basically it's like a feature request, kind of is how I look at it.
Oh, cool. So you guys, you kind of have your own little, system of checks and balances, or, exactly. If you're like, hey, well, you don't even need to build this table because like, just go to this view here and it'll have everything.
Yeah. But we're not slowing anything down as well, where we're saying like, no, don't not build the table. If you want to build the table, just make a new tab and build it. And then we'll determine if it's worth integrating or not, or if it even like works.
Right.
It's kind of like it's a good way to combine like development space with production.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like, get what you need now, and then we can, observe it later and determine if it's, an isolated thing or something that should be added to the whole. Very cool.
Yeah. And it's a pretty good workflow. I wish that there was a way to actually make it like structurally that we could say, oh, you only have edit access on these tabs. Mm-hmm. That's not really possible. We've been playing around actually with CSS hides.
Okay, cool.
So I kind of just show you. So you can actually make a Chrome extension that hides custom CSS. So if I let's just say like I wanted to make it so that title didn't exist, you could go in here. And essentially, I'm not sure exactly what it is. Essentially, you get really deep into this CSS, and then you get each column, and then you could delete a column, and then you could make a Chrome extension that just deletes every single instance of that column, and then it would make it uneditable.
Right, I see, because they don't have the drop down to do it.
Exactly, the drop down would get deleted.
Interesting
That's what we've been playing around with, but it would require a lot of work just kind of going through and determining all of these things that we want to hide. So for now, we're just operating on the honor system, but that's something we've thought about. Right.
Yeah. Some sort of kind of more granular permissions definitely would be, a little helpful. But I guess now that we've sort of, talked about the big sort of scope of how you guys work in the space, should we dig in a bit, and maybe you can go through a few of the tables to show us how everything's set up?
Yeah, sure. I'll kind of just start here just so we can kind of make a product. So unfortunately, I have to delete all of this would normally be filled with data, of course, but I can't.
Yeah, don't show us your super secret Nomad stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so essentially here is just our product information and UPC, Universal Product Code. That's just how everyone defines product. So I have my view that is just showing everyone's personal view. But just kind of go to... Oh, I'm actually not on my own computer, so that's not possible. I'll just go to grid view. It's fine. All right, so just new create new products. So we actually have our product name is a formula. So let's say we want to make let's just call it an adapter. And it's going to be a 3-port adapter. All right. So then we just made a new product. That's pretty much, we'll make this an active product. And we're going to make this really high priority as well. And then all this other information, not really necessary, but it's just there. All right, so then that's our product. And I mean, this is pretty simple, just thing, but we just have to build this out a little bit so we can get into more interesting features. Okay, so next we need to give it a SKU. All our SKUs essentially encode what the product is, which is kind of interesting. So it's basically like kind of like a hex code in a way. Oh, that's not coming up because I haven't defined. There's a lot of information, so things aren't defined.
Right. Yeah, you guys definitely have a lot stored in here.
Yeah, that'll work. All right. Here we go. Sorry. All right. So then we just have to define a category for it. So this will be power. Price. So each of one of these things. So now I want to do size. And essentially what this is doing is assigning a code to each category, and it just builds it. Then later in the process, whenever we have a SKU, you can I'm just going to do random ones from now on. It doesn't matter.
Right, but you'll be able to tell just sort of by each digit in each place what the attributes of that product are.
Each digit uniquely identifies the product. And then if we're doing something like, so we actually have a Google sheet that's built out. So we export all our Airtable to Google Sheets just every hour. Mm-hmm. And so we actually have a Google sheet that's built out that'll make a code, like a snippet of code. It'll just read the SKU and just define it. So if you're doing anything in Zapier, for instance, you can just have that code just run, and then it's just like, oh, in M334022220, I can tell you the size, the color, every aspect of that product.
Awesome.
And then we use this kind of logic called I call it just overriding. And essentially, whenever we make something, we just override it. And the reason we do this is just to make sure that if someone comes in here and just accidentally is like, oh, actually, this was wrong. It should be light gray instead of dark gray. We don't want the SKU to change because that's what's printed on the packaging and how we're identifying it.
Right.
So we override that. So for important things, we have this override idea. And it's pretty simple. It's just if it's blank, don't do anything. If it's not blank, then do something.
Right. Just in case, you don't want, that shouldn't be like live data that can be updated after it's.
And it also really helps for like kind of fringe case issues. Like let's say, for example, maybe we made the product and we printed the SKU wrong on all the packaging. Mm-hmm. We just override it and we don't have to change everything in the whole system.
Nice.
Yeah. So it's a pretty good workflow for that. So we could define some dimensions for it. Not really necessary, but at least we'll put it in there. Customs info, same kind of thing. And again, why we do all this like separation of this product data is so that each team can kind of do each aspect. So like the inbound logistics team can do the customs info, and then our kind of more like our like sourcing team can do like the product dimensions.
Right. Yeah. Because getting kind of overwhelmed, I think, by the number of fields in a table sometimes is like a real problem. So just sort of separating out, being like, you only need to concern yourself with this is pretty helpful.
Yeah.
And then when you guys have a new product to add, are you kind of going through and manually adding it? Or is there some kind of automation that takes care of this?
For adding a new product, we normally go through and manually add it just because there's just so much information. It's so important to have this in our database.
Right.
I wish there was a better way to automate like bringing things around. You can't actually edit these like linking fields very well, or I haven't really found a good way of doing it. But I'll show you in a second once we're kind of done like linking all of this, what it kind of looks like. I just have to give this information. So we can do it. But this process would be done over the course of like several months, essentially, as we go each stage of the product development. And then, so that's it. Then we're done.
Cool. Right. So it's like you can kind of know, and everything's numbered, so it follows that kind of linear progression pretty much.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, so there's actually this view that kind of shows you where, so you can kind of track where everything is, just where it's linked. along.
Nice. Right.
And then you can also tell if something just was never linked. Like say, like maybe the team that was doing the dimensions just is behind because they're missing some things, but the people doing the pricing are already done. So you can kind of see where that is and what needs to be done before it can actually be launched as a product.
Nice.
And the reason, just quickly on the reasoning why we do this parse page, is we want to have this searchable string. So one thing that how Airtable works is it searches off this first identifier field.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to put everything into this parse field, which is kind of a pain, to be honest, because we just have to make a bunch of lookups. But essentially, parse is just everything put together.
Got it.
Okay, so now we have a product that we can actually buy or use.
I want that product.
Yeah.
I would like to order
it. Port adapter. It's really exciting. All right, so now we'll make a test account. And then that's pretty much all we need for that. All right, so now we can start making some objects. So the order object essentially links directly with the directory.
Got it.
And that's just how that works. All right, now I have that object. So another thing we do is we use formulas on this first identifier field, and this is a good way to kind of catch errors if things aren't fully inputted. And then you can kind of make required fields in a way, because every time you don't have a required field, it'll throw an error. I think this is a really useful thing to do on almost every single tab.
I agree. Yeah, definitely formulas and primary fields are the way to go, just because you can kind of manipulate things like that and give indicators.
Yeah, there's almost like no reason to not have a formula in the primary field.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it looks like I need a date.
And then certainly you guys, since this is mainly for, wholesale, you have some sort of, portal, right, where people go to place these orders and the data is just, sent to Airtable, or are orders mainly taken, like via phone or via email? And
Yeah, so since we have so many like international partners, it's actually pretty, there is some technology that you can do like PDF parsing and stuff like that. I don't really believe in it or think that it's worth the effort. Let's say we do 100 orders a month. It's probably, it might be worth it at some point. Like let's say you're doing 1,000 orders. Yeah, then it would start to maybe you want to do the parsing. But I think, right here, you just have to enter 4 fields. So it's not that tough. And I think the amount of errors avoided by doing that is probably worth it to just have that.
Right. And it's like everyone's POs look different, if you're not making them order through the same system. So I wouldn't really trust a PDF parser in that scenario either.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm one to try and get everything to be as automated as possible. But there are times where it's just not worth it.
Mm-hmm, for sure.
All right. So then, we kind of just have to build out all this information so that we can kind of show some more interesting stuff.
No, this is great to kind of see how, from end to end, how an item travels through the space.
So now I'm going to add a product. So this links to that parse field. And so this is super helpful and then we'll also, if this product was like out of inventory or something, out of inventory would overwrite this and it would not even be there. So you really get a lot of information here. We just made a very simple product that has no inventory and is ready to go. But you can get more information there, which is super helpful for like the team when they're inputting their PO. They're like, oh, actually, there's an issue. I need to get back to them quickly. And it's whatever information they need. So it's not like information overload. It's just, this is the status of those items.
Right.
So then this object is basically a child of orders. So you have to link it. And so now we're kind of filling this out. So that's pretty much all you have to do for a product.
Right. And then, of course, if I had ordered, 1,000 phone cases, right, that would be another line item linked to that order.
Yeah, so exactly. So now I need to put in that information.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just in all line items. You'll get a better view. Yeah, so let's say you ordered 1,000, right? So then the way our pricing works, and this actually took a lot of time to kind of figure out the best way to do this. Because the way, if you think about what a price entry is it's kind of like a dual layer object. It's like it's associated to two things, if that makes sense. It's associated to an item and an account. There's no real good way of doing that relationship in Airtable or in any other system because it's basically 3D. So the way we do it is we have this thing called price book entry. And so if we go to accounts pricing, so this ID is basically just generated. It's UBC and price book name. So I need to link this to. Is that the name of the account? I forget the name of the account. Was it test? Yeah.
Test.
Yeah. Didn't revealed a little bit about some terms, but that's doesn't really matter. Okay, so that'll link now. All right, so then what this formula does is basically just puts this together. And I wish there was a way to do a formula that then became a lookup. I think that's probably would be my most requested feature for Airtable.
For sure.
And for now, you just have to drag it across.
Yeah, I have the same problem where I'm like, I really want this value that's auto-generated to just become a linked record automatically.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, it's good old fashioned, copy paste or, link a record or, maybe you could get Zapier to do it in some cases. But yeah, I think something like this too, right? You need it to kind of instantly be there. It's just
that's the problem. That I've looked at doing it with Zapier, but it's not instant. So there'd be a delay, and then you don't know. So if you're entering a lot of line items, it's actually really easy because you just get a big list, and then you can just take this and just drag it across.
Right. Yeah. So makes sense.
I think I messed up naming that somehow. But now leave it like this. And then it just auto links. And then once again, for things like pricing, we have the override pricing logic. So if I want to make it $12, I can just override it. And if you want to lock in the price, you lock in the price.
Right.
We just always use these overrides, and it's the same thing. It's just the drag.
Mm-hmm.
And that's pretty much it for line item. Then each person has different fields revealed as what they want. And then it's on each object that get carried on. So like the orders has their own notes, the line items has their own notes, and then also has the order notes. Makes sense.
Nice.
So then we go to shipments. Shipments kind of the same concept as child of line items. But this allows us to basically combine multiple POs and consolidate shipments, which is super helpful. Let me go to this. I'll go to someone's actual view so it's more usable. So I need to make a new. Everyone's views are so different. I don't even know how to use.
Right. But I mean, I guess that's another cool thing about Airtable is that, each one of your logistics team, right, can set up whatever view or flow works best for them.
Yeah.
So you're just like, hey, these are the things you definitely need to fill in or put in. And then, I can be like, well, I want to do it this way. So
exactly.
I need to put in only these things. So I don't need to look at anyone else's stuff.
Yeah, no, it's super helpful. I basically just need to go back to this. Essentially, I just need to link this to a shipment.
Right. Another thing I wish, like when you have a bunch of fields, I wish you could search for the field name and then it would bring you to that field.
That would be a great feature. All right, there we go. All right, so when you're in this view, you basically can just make all these shipments, and then you attach line items to each shipment. So that's where like the crossover is, and then this kind of builds what your shipment looks like. And then that's kind of the last step in making this, because then we have all of these steps, and then this will like link. This isn't going to work, but in theory, if this was a real order, you'd be able to track the order status and just be able to share those links with everyone.
Right. Cool.
And then we use the blocks to make commercial invoices.
I love your commercial invoice names. That's amazing.
Yeah, that's pretty funny.
Yeah, I used to have to do a little bit of logistics and international shipping, and it can be such a headache sometimes.
Yeah, so you probably know as more than I do, but essentially a lot of countries have very stringent requirements that you would never expect.
Yeah, and I'm sure your team knows it's like if it gets over a certain dollar amount, right, you need to split the shipment. Otherwise, like you can't, self-broker it. Oh my gosh, it's crazy. But it's cool kind of how, really like this whole sort of system shows how, really when you're doing logistics and orders and stuff, you want to be able to standardize it into a one-fits-all process, but really that's not how things work actually in the world. So you guys have built a system where, it does allow for that flexibility, those overrides, combining shipments, splitting shipments, all of that stuff that in a more structured system you'd have to do, a bunch of workarounds to be able to cleanly, separate and remap.
Yeah, that's a big thing that we really benefited from this is that exactly what you're saying. Like you want to have enough structure, but then also have the elements where you can do all these workarounds. And like a lot of systems, like they'll just output one commercial invoice, which technically makes sense because you think you always need the same commercial invoice. But really you need to have like all these other versions, and then you want like different packing lists and like different accounts to need different information.
Right. Yeah. And you guys can create all that and just choose what works for that particular order instead of, just right.
And it's easy to like a lot of times you'll be constrained because you'll have the one purchase order and then you have to make the shipment from it. But in reality, like you want to be able to move all these parts around. So I think it gives a lot of like power and flexibility to our logistics team to be able to do that.
Agreed. Yeah, this is really cool. Just having that, just thinking back to I used to work in the promotional products industry doing, some order processing and fulfillment, and just thinking how some systems are like, they make it really convenient for salespeople, but then the back end is just sort of like a total cluster. So it seems really cool that, there's this kind of philosophy that you've built with your team and their competence in Airtable in this space that, you do allow for that sort of flexibility and just groupings and ungroupings and, making it so it doesn't have to be so cut and dry and nice and even, because the real world is not like that. Even in shipping.
Yeah, exactly. And then it also, just by building all this, we can then work, like those workarounds are great, but we still have the source data that isn't really worked around. Because that's what happens when you get into these problems where you're working around everything and 10% of the time you're not even using the workflow. You're going outside of the workflow and then you're losing the data, and then like you're not even, because everything that's losing money is the thing that is outside the workflow, for example.
Right. And it's something that like you can't track because it never shows up on the reports because you did something weird to be able to make it look how you needed it to look. So
yeah, exactly. And then from a finance side, I'm coming in and being like, hey guys, like, why is it saying that we shipped like 90% of our goods? Like, what happened to the other 10%? And they're like, oh, well, we had to like do this because Kuwaiti customs said we had to print it with blue ink, and then like obviously we couldn't do that, so we had to go around it. And it's like, oh, well, now I have to go through and figure that whole thing out.
Right. Yeah. This sort of, it makes sure that everything can, kind of get caught.
Basically make sure that everything works for everyone.
I love it. Yeah. Thank you so much for kind of giving us a tour of this, and even just kind of seeing you populate the records, it was kind of cool to see how something goes, really from A to Z. So I guess, tell us, is there anything else, kind of closing remarks you want to leave us with for this base before we sign off?
I mean, there's a couple like interesting things I'm trying to find with this field that I have. I think it's one of these, but there's a couple like interesting things you can do with Airtable. I'll just explain that. I can't find the actual field where it is. One of these is basically, there's no limit to how many if statements you can put in.
Mm-hmm.
So you can basically write, like, I think it's like basically if you put into a Word document, it's like 10 pages long and it's just a step function of every pound level. And you can just like make an equation in like Excel or Google Sheets that just makes your if statement for you. And it can save a ton of time because there's no limit to how much calculation power you can kind of make Airtable do. And it doesn't seem like it slows it down too much. So there's some really interesting things you can do with formulas where you just make these super long nested if statements, and it's really easy to do and without any thinking.
And so, two questions. Well, first, maybe we'll have to have you like back on the show sometime to talk about building those nested ifs. But also then in this particular case, are you using it then to estimate shipping based on?
Yeah, so that's what I'm trying to find. So this is all of our like cost associated with it. One of these. So one of these like we simplified it. But I mean, you can see that all of these are just nested if statements pretty much.
Right. You're trying to find the big kahuna, the one that's like...
Yeah, there's one that's like really...
ifs long.
Yeah. It doesn't really matter.
But very, very cool. Yeah, no, I really like that how, if you can figure out a way to kind of build those a little bit more efficiently, it can essentially operate in whatever kind of, demented, specific, annoying shipping cost rules there might be.
Yeah, exactly. And you're able to like granularize things and make it really interesting. And then another thing that we do that's really powerful, these import-export pages. And essentially these are we basically just match API documentation on each of the other platforms that we use.
Oh, cool.
So we can actually just because one of the biggest pains with working with APIs is just names. Like you have to spend so much time taking the name of something and putting it into the name of something else.
Right.
Which is one thing that Zapier does a really good job of solving, but it's even easier if the names are just the same. So like we go into like our Shopify one, this is what Shopify uses for all their names of all their fields. So we can just quickly design anything to integrate with any system by just having these import-export pages that are essentially all of these numbered tabs put into however their system takes it. And it saves us a ton of development time.
That's awesome. I love that. Yeah, just making everything map the same so you don't have to sit there and...
Yeah, because there's no limit how many lookup fields you can do.
Mm-hmm. Very cool.
Yeah.
Well, Remy, thank you so much for giving us this tour. Really cool. And I guess before we sign off, just tell everyone else where they can go to check out Nomad Goods or more about yourself.
Yeah, so our website's hellonomad.com. You can check us out. Obviously, I think our attention to detail on our back end also shows on our product design. I like to think they're also really smart guys working on that part.
Very cool. We'll include that link in the show notes so people can check it out and grab a new iPhone case or something. Thank you so much, Remy. I really appreciate getting to learn a little bit more about you and Nomad and your crazy, demented, awesome, wonderful, magic ERP.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, thanks for having me.